Hey, I'm Fred.
And I'm Ant.
And this is Creator Generation.
Create a generation of hype.
All right, Frederico, what is happening this week?
This week we're chatting with Gwen Miller, who is the VP of Content at Kin and a digital video strategist. And she's got some great insights on traditional media crossovers into digital platforms.
This is very key where most YouTubers flail and fall, is they'll suddenly decide, I'm burnt out, I've been doing this for 7 years, doing the same thing over and over again. I've decided I don't want to do beauty tutorials anymore. I'm just a sketch comedy channel. You can't do that.
Just a quick note, this is a cut down version of this interview. If you want to check out the whole podcast, head on over to your favorite podcast platform like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and you can check it out there. Let's get into it.
Let's get into it.
Welcome back to Creator Generation. This week we are joined by Gwen Miller. Gwen, how you going?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Gwen, you're the VP of Content for Kin Community. What does that mean?
I run content for Kin, which is a digital women's lifestyle company. So we make channels that live across YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram for celebrities. And we are aimed at women 25 plus. So the elderly audience online, I count myself among that number. But we work to create very high quality TV quality content that is also very digitally native for some of the most beloved celebrities and nostalgic stars of TV.
You said 25 and above is the elderly group. It's like
Elderly, I know.
It's being pushed lower and lower.
And I think especially for the internet, like this has been a long time coming to edge up to the point where we can confidently build an audience that's between the ages of 25 and 44 and make a profitable business off of it.
Where did this start for you?
So I actually started out in the television space and spent the first 5 years of my career in television. It was very formulaic. Like there was really no space for experimentation. Everything was so expensive. The turnaround times were so great that you spent 6 months making a television show and then would go up and it would get canceled. So about the time when all my friends were like, I just did a webisode, I'm going to hide that on my resume because, that'll never get me more work. I started thinking, you know what would make all the stuff I'm developing for TV so much better right now is if you could have audience participation, if people could interact. Like all the stuff that I was starting to see was possible online. So I made a very conscious decision to move over into the digital space and took a step back to do it, frankly.
Well, traditional TV and media is so frightened of the digital space because of it used to be a very a fortress approach. It had huge barriers to entry, very structured.
Well, you're getting rid of the gatekeepers, right? So the problem is for a challenge for any media company getting into this, whether they're traditional or whether they're a startup digital media company, is you're not just competing. It's not like cable coming in and they were just competing with other cable companies and the networks. Like we are always competing with what I call the million monkeys at a typewriter. And the truth is, you have a million monkeys experimenting at stuff, one of them is just going to hit. Yeah. And obviously we as a company don't have the luxury to try a million times to get one hit, right? Our hit rate has to be much better than that. But we are competing with millions and millions of people just trying a bunch of stuff and with the tools of creation at this point, it's very well that we can get defeated in a competition with a 14-year-old in their basement because they're more passionate about a certain topic, or they just have spent a crazy amount of their waking hours thinking about this one thing, which we have not found that one person out of the professional producers in Hollywood who has spent that amount of time. So it is definitely more challenging in terms of competition, and it's not kind of this safe, sanitized world that these kind of media companies had built up, where you could build these huge infrastructures of people who, schmoozed other people. They don't seem to understand that where the quality comes from is from that passion and that knowledge on the topic, not because you have a jib shot. Like that has been like the fallacy that I've spent my entire career trying to correct in Hollywood. Every time I work with a new media company, new media is another media company, like they always come in being like, oh, digital's just been waiting, not to mention Quibi's name, but digital's just been waiting for us Hollywood types to come in and show them what true production quality looks like, and millions of views will come our way. And it's, I hate to tell them, the tropes that we were taught in film school as what good television was are just that, they're tropes. It is not necessarily like something that audiences are asking for.
How does the traditional talent end up working in digital and vice versa? You guys sort of crossing that divide then?
Yeah, I think the problem with the switch from YouTube to traditional is the age difference in the audiences. So we actually can do that fairly easy with our talent base. And that's because we are working with people who are already on TV, but also because we're aiming at a slightly older audience. So when I have an average age of 25 to 34 and a television cable channel that we're selling content to has an average age of 44, that's not as big of a difference as if your target audience on YouTube is 13 to 17 year olds. And I think that's the problem we've seen with a lot of these YouTubers trying to transition over, is the demographic is just so vastly different that nobody on TV is interested. And I don't really see a scenario where TV is getting those younger audiences back. Like it's just, that's what they've been trying to do, like to track the, like you're an outmoded piece of technology. Like you're not going to get that generation back. Now I do think there is a world where you have a lot more symbiosis between like the Netflixes and the streamers of the world, because that young eyeballs are watching there. But I just think it always has to be clear that if you're taking a YouTuber whose audience is mostly 17-year-olds, you better be targeting an audience on your service that is 17-year-olds.
Well, what about format? I mean, you mentioned the Netflixes, which are obviously one step closer, but what about a format from YouTube that you try to take to a Netflix? Like, what do you think the challenges are going to be there?
I think what we found very clearly is like those are two very different viewing experiences. Even for myself, like what I want to watch on YouTube is very different than what I want to watch on Netflix. Like I don't go to YouTube to get a format per se. Like I go to YouTube for the personalities, but I definitely do go to Netflix for the format. I think probably where you're going to have more success is spinning something off, right? Yeah. So you kind of have a germ of like, I know my audience is this, they enjoy X type of thing. What is off that's more formatty that I could sell to a streamer that wouldn't feel like YouTube content, would feel like television content, would feel very formatted and feel very fun, but would still be very true to my audience core. So I could use my existing base to push and promote over to the streamer platform.
Hey, I want to backtrack real quickly, Gwen, on something you mentioned briefly in passing, where you said you're getting a pretty good picture of what a creator lifetime looks like.
I came back to this recently because in about 2014, I did a kind of a big survey for the company I was at that point on like who are kind of the up and comers in the space. So I started going back in and pulling from that list and just seeing like what was their trajectory. How long did it, first of all, take them to kind of hit the inflection point when they really started to take off? Like what was the grind to the point when they're like, they could legitimately say they made it? From there, when did they hit their peak? And from there, when would kind of what I kind of casually calling it hit the point of irrelevance, right? And what I kind of found, and now there are some notable exceptions that are like been going since like 2007, and they're still like, now I will say they're not at their peak. Like no one stays at the peak, but like they have managed to make themselves long-term careers where they can make decent money. But what it takes in that case is the ability to not get so full of yourself that you always have to be getting bigger and bigger. Unless you're PewDiePie, you're not going to keep getting bigger and bigger in this space. Like there's a few notable exceptions to this rule, but it almost proves the rule, right? So if you're able to let go of your ego and just build a very solid business, you can keep going on YouTube. But what I find for for typical YouTubers, what you see, and this is funny because before I started doing this research, I always had this rule of thumb for like the channels that you start in your basement, like you're going to be grinding for around 3 years before you really see that, you know, like that traction to the level where you're going to be making good money off of YouTube. Again, there's all the exceptions, but typically that seems to be the thing, is you've got to put in the sweat and tears for 3 years before you can like really be bringing back, you know, in pretty good money. So once you hit the 3-year mark and you start seeing the line going from inching up to like shooting up, typically there's about 2 years to peak. So at about 5 years into a YouTuber's career, it's typically when the peak happens. It can shift, but it's been surprisingly consistent in the research I've been doing that about the 5-year mark is when they've kind of hit the pinnacle of their glory. They kind of rule the world at that point. And then like the problem psychologically for YouTubers from there is they've been feeding off for 5 years that slow growth or that rapid growth, but some sort of growth. Even in that first 3 years where they're grinding, they're still seeing every upload do a little bit better than the upload before. There is a big psychological motivator, and that keeps you going on the grind on YouTube. Then you hit your peak, and like naturally, like not everyone, like something crazy is gonna happen in your life. You have this format that just blows up, and for a year, and typically it lasts about a year, you were like the hottest, I don't know if we can swear on this podcast, but the hottest whatever, the hottest shit on the planet, like, and you're riding high. From there on, like, you start going down. Now, for another several years, you're still, for all intents and purposes, one of the top performing YouTubers on the platform, but psychologically it's difficult because each upload isn't getting a little bit more. You're coming more into stasis. And in that case, the kind of the things that I've seen that decides if you stay around is if you can psychologically handle that, and if you can be flexible enough to experiment so that you stay in the zeitgeist. But this is very key, where most YouTubers flail and fall, is they'll suddenly decide, I'm burnt out. I've been doing this for 7 years, doing the same thing over and over again. I've decided I don't want to do beauty tutorials anymore. I'm just a sketch comedy channel. And then in the next day, they're a sketch comedy channel. Like, you can't do that, right? You can start slowly experimenting and seeing where the audience is taking you. But a lot of the times, because of the pressures of burnout and the pressures this platform puts on creators, they end up burning out themselves and going down kind of in, you know, they can't keep it up anymore. And they try some drastic things that don't work, because the only sure way to survive in this industry is to be methodical, to slowly experiment, but never let yourself get complacent and just be like, well, I'm doing these same 2 formats for the next 5 years. And then, you know, wonder why your core audience is like, I've been watching the same thing for 2 years, and they end up leaving you. But you're like, but I got all these viral views. The viral views are not your core audience. You need to be looking at what your subscriber base is doing and ignoring kind of the fake signals you get from virality.
That is absolutely probably one of the best things anyone's ever said on this podcast in terms of advice, I think, in terms of that methodical approach and understanding the subscribers really clearly. And I mean, look, you talked about it before in terms of making smart decisions and data-driven decisions. Can you just sort of maybe outline that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, I think the key thing is, like, you know, whenever someone asks me, like, what's the secret to gaming the algorithm? Like, you can sit down and learn, like, you can sit down and be like, here are the machine learning algorithms that YouTube puts all content through, you know, like to select, and understanding that might help you some. It's something that I'm fascinated with, and I know, and I do think is helpful. But at the end of the day, if you're always following the algorithm as it stands today, you're always one step behind, because the algorithm's always changing. The best thing for you to do is to go where the algorithm is going. And any single one of these platforms, I don't care what platform it is, at the end of the day, they're pursuing audience satisfaction. They don't always get it right. They get it. Sometimes they put things in place that have unintended consequences. But at the end of the day, that's where they're trying to get and are trying to optimize towards. So if you put up content that is super serving your audience in the long run, like, it will be what the algorithm wants, once they get the algorithm more right. So that's what I say, that understanding your data isn't about understanding how to game the algorithm. It's understanding what makes your audience tick, which in turn is the way you game the algorithm. And you can get sucked into comments, and comments are just the loudest loudmouths of your audience. Like, and you can look at the data, and oftentimes it'll directly contradict at what we love this, and you're like, well, actually, like, we had this huge drop in retention because people obviously didn't love it. But if you left, like, you weren't mad enough to comment, I hated this, but it's very obvious that when you say more of that, you don't really mean more of that, right? So I just, like, it is something that you cannot substitute. Understanding what that coded language means. And it does mean putting a little bit of time. Like, if there's one place you're going to put your time in, it's to understand the basic structure of your data and what each data point in conjunction with each other is telling you. A lot of people get weighed down because they want to pick one data point. As we know, a lot of that is views, right? But I had a really one of the YouTube 1.0 creators back in the day, this was like 8 years ago, told me that she only looked at her like to dislike ratio. And I was like, oh, and because what does that get you? If you're trying to minimize your dislikes, that's just going to get you very bland content. So sure, like, you have a good like to dislike ratio, but nobody's going to stick around. And her channel did end up dying within like a year of that. So, like, you cannot can't pick one data point. Like, you have to have a holistic view. And yes, it takes a little bit more work. And yes, you can probably get through that first part of your YouTube career and be just fine by being that, one of those million monkeys who hits the jackpot. But you're not going to stay there unless you put in the work to understand your data, which is in turn understanding your audience, which is in turn giving the algorithm what it wants and ensuring that you stay relevant.
I'd really like to know what's in your crystal ball. What do you see the future of all this?
Look, I think the future is still the same future it was a year ago, but it's been massively accelerated by what the world has gone through in 2020. The things that I'm really looking at in the future is, we've always said community is important. But I think even more than ever, if you're starting to look at the new battleground is not being drawn between TV and digital, that battle has been lost. Now we're looking at OTT versus the more social platforms. And the one thing that OTT still lacks is it's not really an interactive thing. Like, yeah, now you can do Netflix party, but, so I think you're just going to start see that kind of a face-off, kind of even more differentiate between what is social video and what is just really reporting traditional TV over to Netflix. I think the two platforms that I'm really looking at right now is Twitch and TikTok. Let's do the test. Obviously, I think TikTok has been kind of the big story of this year. And I think that is altogether due to their swipe up method of serving videos to you that has kind of opened up a magical world of discovery that is always hard on a click-to-play platform like YouTube. But Twitch, I think, is the kind of the silent killer right now. I think they have a lot going for them. I know personally for me, just during these pandemic times, like, Twitch has this vibe that none of the other platforms have. It moves a lot slower. If you're doing live on any other platform, you're pattering. It's like freaking QVC over here. But on Twitch, like, they're just sitting back, relaxing, playing games. They may go quiet for 30 seconds before they comment on something. Like, it is a totally different vibe. And I think it's more akin to in-person interactions. And I think especially in a world where we're a lot more fractured and apart from each other, that's very important. And I don't think that's going away after the pandemic, because I see we're moving to a society that is no longer so centered in the cities. And you'll probably see a lot more people working remotely in other places. And I think a platform like Twitch has a lot of opportunity to kind of replace that feeling of in-person community.
Great insight and awesome place to finish up, I think.
We've been so lucky to have you just impart so much knowledge, Gwen. Genuinely need that. So thanks so much for hanging out with us and sharing your thoughts and gazing into the crystal ball and yeah, it's been awesome.
We will see.
We'll hold you to it. I'll tell you. I'll remind you.
Yeah, check down the list. Come back to me in a year.
Hey, I'm on board with you too. So I'm going to throw my hat in the ring with you with what you said too. So we'll go down together if we're wrong, or we'll rise up together. How's that?
Perfect. Love it.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Gwen Miller,
Gwen.
thank you so much for hanging out with us on Creator Generation.
Create a generation. Look on the mic.